Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, inviting you to join me on this journey. What happens when two children grow up in homes where safety isn't consistent? The adults are carrying wounds of their own. Survival becomes the first language you ever learn. And what happens decades later when both of those children, now adults, choose to rewrite the story instead of repeating it? My guest today is Jason Blyth, and between us, we share something powerful and painful. A childhood shaped not by stability, but by volatility. Not by emotional safety, but by constant adaptation. The details of our lives are different. The landscapes were different. The generations were different, but the imprint was the same. Learning to navigate explosive environments, reading danger before reading ourselves, wearing masks that kept us alive but disconnected, and becoming adults long before we had the chance to be children. Jason's journey took him through years of misunderstood behaviour, misdiagnosed symptoms, addiction, collapse, and finally the courage to choose life. My journey took me through high performance, overachievement, nervous system breakdown, disability, and the long reclamation of self. What brings us together today is not the trauma, but the transformation. And what drives this conversation is simple. Young people deserve better. The system must do better. And adults who survive the hard way can be the ones to change the story for the next generation. Jason now works with youth, schools, communities and leaders to interrupt cycles of trauma and help young people choose differently before collapse becomes their turning point. Today's conversation is raw, real, and grounded in lived experience, not theory. This is not about blame, it's about clarity, compassion, and the courage to build systems that actually help young people heal. Jason, welcome to Suddenly Different.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a fantastic intro. I was just listening captivated, and it was beautiful and really well spoken, but thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely a delight. When I saw you speak on at Next Stage, I was glued to your presence and the story and the suspense and everything about it. Just feel that you have such an important job in the world with so many teenagers and children lost, having been affected by the COVID drama era, and also the confusion of social media and AI and just those hormones, and really busy parents. I know in my generation, my mum stayed at home and then I chose to go to work and not be a stay-at-home mum. But I think that a lot of kids don't actually get that much time with their parents for them to really feel connected and understood, and maybe they even sometimes feel in the way. So let's get started, I think, with the human truth. So, Jason, before anything else, when you think about your childhood, what did being a kid actually feel like from inside your body?
I never really felt like I had a childhood. Everything was completely upside down and inside out. Everything that the world had said should be in regards to the way that a parent should love, especially a mum should love their child, a little son. That was the complete opposite of the world that I came from. I was raised into an extremely violent home. As you said before, perfect world is volatility. It was chaos and survival. And the world told me that again, a mum's supposed to love you, they're supposed to protect you, they're supposed to cherish and nurture you. But that wasn't the experience that I had. My mum, from a very young age, tried to kill me, and I had my first psychology appointment at 2 years old, which we'll obviously probably get to a little bit more as we go down through the rest of this podcast. But as soon as I was born, my mum rejected me as well. Home was extremely violent. It was survival. There was no childhood.
2 years old. I cannot imagine that happening, and especially when I look at my grandchildren and my children, like, I love them. I was a single mum with my first child, but he came everywhere with me in that first period of time, and I was probably possessive. If anything, he was mine, and he was my glorious miracle. So I can't imagine your mum, and I can't imagine how it was for your mum in why she was how she was.
Well, there was a lot of complexity around the specific circumstance. So when my mum was 16, she was an absolute prodigy child with her life ahead of her. She was just on track to have a hugely successful life. But at 16, she made a decision that changed her life forever, to the point that it would never be the same again. And one afternoon, she got on the back of a motorbike with a boyfriend that she had at the time. They had an accident, and she ended up in a coma on life support, completely brain dead. And it got to the point where my grandparents were told that she would never be anything more than a bedside vegetable. So the doctors suggested they turn off her life support, which they did. But she breathed on her own. But she was still in a coma. And it was 6 months later, completely out of the blue, she woke up, and until the day that my grandma died, she maintained categorically that my mum's survival was nothing short of a genuine miracle. There's no medical explanation for her survival. But the girl who woke up was brain damaged, paralysed down her entire right side. She was a shell of a person. So she from that point on required a lot of care and has never worked a day in her life. She's been on accident compensation. She wasn't fit to have a child. She certainly wasn't fit to be raising a child and in possession of a child on her own. And I was an intense child. I was a full-on little kid. Like my little boy, I've got a 7-month-old boy, and he's full-on. He has a lot of energy. He's got a big personality. And I think in a way, it's given me almost an appreciation and a deepening of the forgiveness that I have towards my mum, because I can see how challenging he is, and I don't have a brain injury.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, and with a brain injury, she wouldn't have had the cognitive. So firstly, it's hard the first time you're a mum, right? But when you don't have a fully developed brain and a fully functional brain, making decisions cognitively versus reactionary would be hard. And as parents, often we do find we react first and then think about it, because kids can push your buttons, but it doesn't make it right. So we've talked, or you've talked, about learning to scan rooms and detect danger and adjust yourself before you had words. And I suppose I know in myself that on hindsight, sometimes I was detecting danger when it wasn't really there, because I saw danger in certain behaviours. So how did your early survival skills of learning to scan rooms shape you to who you next were, who you became?
Yeah, look, I've reflected on this a lot, actually, quite recently. It's really hard to get sort of objectivity around who you are and the way that your mind thinks, and especially if you've come from the kinds of childhood that we've had. It's not, you don't have these conversations normally with people to be able to understand whether or not your way of thinking or operating is completely normal. And I realise that I am always 10 steps ahead. So I'm a visionary type of person. I'm always looking at what the chain of events will happen if I do any one thing. I know if I do this, it's going to lead to this, which will lead to this, to this, to this, to this, to this. And I'm always on alert now. So if I ever do anything just silly, like if I turn around and accidentally knock a cup off the bench or something, which is very rare, but I will almost self-flagellate and go, how did I not see that coming all those steps before? And so for me now, I'm 10 steps ahead at all time. But the hypervigilance that I was experiencing as a kid has made me very, very insightful, because I learned to spot patterns. I learned to watch when someone's eyes said something different from their mouth, and it taught me to read people, and it taught me as well to be able to spot the patterns in people's behaviour. So it's allowed me to understand a lot more about the depth of humanity and what people give away just from little tells.
So with those survival skills, did you work out sort of ways to alter the path, right? So you could see in your mum's face what she was going to do. Did you figure out how to disrupt that and become safe again? Or did you just, go into another room or run out of the house or?
Yeah, I learned to spot energy pretty quick.
Yeah.
And it didn't always work perfectly because my mum was so extremely volatile. She could very literally go from hysterically laughing to crying to rage with the click of a finger. So early on, I would do things like try to escape and barricade myself against a door, but I was too small to be able to hold the doors closed. So they would be pushed open and I would get beaten or get my head stomped on or whatever it was. And then, so I learnt very, very quickly that we had one way out of the house, and I knew that I had to get there before she did. And thankfully, I was pretty quick and small and nimble, and because of her brain injury, because of her being paralysed, her motor skills aren't great. So she can be quite slow and not that coordinated. But I still had to get there before she did. Otherwise, I knew there was times where she absolutely would have killed me. And I would run outside. I would run up into our big backyard, and I would just hide in the bushes until she would calm down. And usually within half an hour or so, I could sneak back inside, and it was like her memory was completely wiped. She would have no recollection of what had happened. The rage would have subsided. But it got to the point where, and I'm not even kidding, like my mum was like a beast. She would become like an animal where her face would change, her tongue would be lashing all over her face, her eyes would widen, and she would scream these guttural sounds, and she'd use her nails like claws to just basically shred at me. And it was quite literally was like living in a house with a savage animal when she turned, and that's why I had to get out of her way. And as I said, I knew there were times where if she had caught me in those moments, she absolutely would have killed me, because it would have been pure bloodthirsty rage.
Wow, that is really, really things of movies, right? Like that being your reality is like, so I know my dad, he had tells in his face when he was going to pop, and we would have, food thrown at, the plate thrown at the wall, and we'd have this rage and everyone would just duck for cover. But yeah, the grandmother in me, the mother in me is just like, can't understand. Even I have compassion, but yeah, that's heavy. And the trouble with having lived in that experience and the glory of who you are today, the glory of the man of who you are today, is that you didn't learn that was normal. You knew it wasn't normal, right?
I did learn. It was a long process, unfortunately. It was one of those things where we'll get to obviously a bit more of the story. But when I left home at 15, because it was no longer like I lived between my grandparents and unfortunately still having contact and being accessible to my mum and my stepdad. But it got to the point at around 15 where I was now big enough to be able to defend myself, and things were dangerous at home. So I was either going to end up in full-time foster care. I'd spent some time in foster care at different periods through my childhood, but I was going to either end up there full-time because my grandma could no longer take care of me because I was too nuts, and it was just dangerous for me to be with my mum and my stepdad. So it was either that or end up on the street. But I left home and I moved from the South Island of New Zealand to the north. And I thought once I left that I would be okay. I thought my problems were circumstantial. I didn't realise that I was traumatised. and
Yes.
that it didn't matter where I went, my problems would follow. So I didn't have any idea of any of this sort of stuff. It was like an iceberg. The issues were hidden well down out of the way. And leaving home was dangerous because I didn't have, not that I really had that many people around me to kind of offer me real guidance. I didn't trust anyone. My grandma was the closest thing to that. But once I left home, I was this extremely volatile, reactionary 15-year-old kid that was completely damaged and broken, going out into the world, had to grow up way too fast. And it was just insane. And for the next 15 years, I had no ability to be able to not be a product of my environment. And in my keynote, right, I tell this story about a dog that, you know, if you've got a dog and you keep it locked in the room and the only attention that you give it is to beat it, well, eventually the dog will attack you. And then one day, when you accidentally leave the door of your house open, the dog will escape. And then the good people outside on the street will try and stop it from getting hit by traffic, but he'll attack them too. And then the people will say, well, it's a bad dog, we should put it down. But all it was doing was what it was trained to do. And I'd become that dog, right? Like all I knew to do was to attack. So yeah, it was something I had to learn, although I knew it wasn't right because I had become like a beaten dog. It was just the reaction that would come out. That was my programmed behavior.
Yeah.
So I would attack, and even though I didn't want to, it wasn't who I am at heart. The behaviors, when they're so deeply ingrained, they just come out.
Yeah. And that goes to show how easily our children learn their version of the world, right? Their version of the world is what they live in. So if they're not being nurtured, then they don't know to be nurtured. If they're not emotionally connected to people, they don't know how to be emotionally connected. And if violence is the answer, is the only thing they're taught, well, it's very hard for them not to suspect that violence is going to come, or that, you know, that's the only thing they've got. And, you know, like the things we take for granted in children with normal upbringings is that, you know, like they might have arguments with their parents, but, you know, like most people have it pretty easy. The level of trauma, you know, is minimal as compared to the extremities that you've experienced, and which makes you totally qualified, beyond qualified, to be discussing the important things that you want to raise with society, that you want to raise with government and social services, and just bring out of just shine some light on what's possible for kids. When you look back now in thinking about the people who tried to help you, so and them misinterpreting your behavior as a problem rather than pain, right? So what did the system do to help you, or to try to help you?
They tried to make me out to be the problem. I don't genuinely believe the system ever tried to genuinely help me. I think there were people that had moments of that. There was a time where I was 11 years old and I went to a doctor's appointment with my mum, and in front of my mum I begged the doctor to take me away because I didn't want to be at home getting hurt anymore. And this doctor wrote a report, as he was supposed to do, which had to be referred to Child Protective Services and to the police in New Zealand to get them to investigate. And in this letter, he writes that he was shocked that 11-year-old had the bravery to do what I'd done and that I appeared as though I was a young adult. So he did the process of what he was supposed to do. But through the rest of these sorts of processes, things got lost. The case itself got completely dropped as the caseworker ended up leaving Child Protective Services, and it was just dismissed. There was no follow-up after 2.5 years. So there was just a bunch of failures that constantly happened. And when I was involved in child psychology, child psychiatry, child psychotherapy, it was just treating symptoms. And this is stuff that we'll obviously get into a bit more. No one ever looked at the root cause of really why I was to be called a problem child or anything. And as far as I'm concerned, if I was to genuinely give you an account of whether or not I believe the system really tried to help me, I would say categorically no.
No, you didn't fit into a box.
No, but I'm one of the things that I'm frustrated with about this is that there was no real duty of care from a system that should have known better. As far as I'm concerned, people aren't just born broken, right? There's responses to and certain behaviours to stimulation that happens, and as I said, I used the language that I was a product of my environment, and I categorically believe that that's the case. So I don't think that people are born pedophiles or rapists or murderers, right? Like we're products of our environment, and if things are left unchecked and they go for far too long, that might be where some people unfortunately end up. But I don't believe people are born like that, right? It happens to be the environmental factors and the nurturing element of it that gets people there. That's what I believe, having lived the life that I've lived. And I don't think that the system did a good enough job of intercepting, and especially with the amount of warning signs, especially with I've got the reports, I've got my mental health records, they're that thick, and from 2 years old until 15, saw about 20 different clinicians. But the fact that there were these reports that were saying that nothing would ever change because my mum was brain damaged, she had to go to anger management courses and things like that. But they were like, she's never going to change. She's brain injured. It's not a choice. She's not choosing not to change. And they would write, they're dangerous. Jason and his mum are dangerous for each other. And essentially, he shouldn't be in her care. But yet I was never taken away from being allowed to have access or have them having access to me.
I wonder if in 2025 that would be different. I wonder whether that branch of the government support services, whether they have the funding, whether the caseworkers have the appropriate load and training to be able to do it, and whether you become anything more than just a task, right? Because that's what it feels like to me, as though you were in a process. There's a problem child reported by maybe the school. You go to an appointment. See, these are all tasks. And if there's no care in the system, if there's no responsibility, accountability in the system to provide you with a standard of life that is what all of us deserve.
It's not. That's the thing. Like, the system is still functioning exactly the same, right? So, this is a big part of the work that I'm doing and spending more time on especially over this next 12 months. And a real big focus of mine. I've just recently been reading through a pretty shocking audit report here from New South Wales. And in 2022 to 2023, there were over 400,000 reports to the Child Protection Hotline of children that were supposed or presumed to be at risk of significant harm. 75% of all of those reports were dropped with no caseworker home visit happening. 75% of them were completely dropped with no investigation, no caseworker visit to the home to actually substantiate if those cases were actually a thing. And it's just crazy because, so I think it was 85,000 children of those did not have their reports done. There was over 100,000 children of those 400,000 reports. So obviously there was multiple reports for individual children. But the statistics are ridiculous. I think it's close to 50%. I think it's 49% of all caseworkers that start at DCJ, like Department of Communities and Justice here in New South Wales, leave within the first 12 months. And I think it's close to 2/3 leave within 5 years, because the system is nowhere near resourced enough. And it's, look, just, I'm going to call it how it is. It's fat and bloated, and the system's not operating in the way that it's supposed to. But yet with the mandatory reporting guidelines, I've got friends that they manage childcare centres
Yeah.
different teachers and things like that. And there's these specific mandatory reporting timeframes, right? And most of those are being failed by DCJ in regards to the response times. But there's this accountability to all of these childcare centres and things that if they don't report within certain timeframes, they can be prosecuted. There can be some legal ramifications. They can lose their licenses and things like that to operate. But yet there's no accountability and responsibility for DCJ as the one that is cared and charged with stewarding policy, the programs that are being run. It's just not functioning at all well. As far as I'm concerned from the report as well, it also states that although they have an idea of some of the mandatory reporting timeframe percentage responses to how each of these, there's some that have to be responded to within 24 hours, within 3 days, within 10 days, and so on. But they have no follow-up at all about how these children are actually being cared for. The widest majority of all of the money is spent on risk reports for the agency, not actually going to assisting families with protecting children. It's just insane. Like, and there's no accountability, there's no responsibility, there's nothing. How can we even turn a blind eye to one child? Like, if one child didn't have their reports investigated, that should be cause for concern. 85,000 in New South Wales alone in a single year that potentially have situations like mine. What kind of future are we creating? And how did we get so shockingly bad at our stewardship to take care of the most vulnerable people on the face of the earth that will become the future of Australia? Like, if you want a safe country for your grandkids and I want a safe country for my child, I think we could expect that these organisations would be held to account to ensure the future generations are growing up in the safest environment possible. But it's not this is New South Wales alone in 1 year.
Why don't we hear about this on mainstream news, right? We hear about youth crime. We're hearing about children who are barely teenagers, right? Doing youth crime. Now, there has to be a question around their parenting to understand why they're out on the street and why they think this is okay, right? And all of these behaviours are happening. And so we're getting up, all up in arms about youth crime. But what about child protection? Like, there is a root source of this problem and we don't hear about it. So thank goodness there are people like you who are really pushing hard to get this into the mainstream conversation.
Yeah, well, it has to be. And there's some really basic things that I think that we could be doing as a nation far better to actually educate our children as well in regards to what they can do to become good parents as they grow up. We've just had a baby, as I've said. Yeah. We've got a 7-month-old. We were very, very active in regards to looking up everything that we would need to know to even have a child. You don't get taught nothing at school. Like, wouldn't that be a basic thing that children could be taught as part of their just basic education when they're at high school or university, where they actually just learn some basics around what parenting is? Like, what are they actually being taught? And again, it's the same with financial literacy. Like, the Barefoot Investor guy has done far more to educate this nation than what people around financial literacy, than what people are getting educated in schools, which it shouldn't even be a question, this kind of stuff. But there is no parenting skills, nothing. It just baffles me that in 2025, we're not actually giving the people in this country and the people of the world a foundation in the things that are really just foundational. The word foundational. And it's just crazy. If that's the kind of thing that's going on, then you can't expect that most people have so many problems, but you just said before, like, mums now, most of the time they have to go to work to be able to even afford to be able to live in a place like Sydney, because the cost of living is so insane. And most of the time they're working just to pay for their kids to be in childcare, being raised by someone else. Like, it's just wild. We're not providing a stable environment for kids to grow up by parents that can even afford to take care of them, spend time on taking care of raising their own children, to give them proper morals, proper ethics, to treat people with respect. Like, the fruit that we're seeing as the result is because the tree is rotten, and it doesn't take a genius to look and see there's some significant issues that really do need to be addressed if we want this country to have a safer environment in the future.
Absolutely. I definitely think education, like, yeah, definitely financial education. And it's not that hard. Like, you can dumb it down to like really basic steps, which we actually need to do for adults even. But yeah, it's speechless. So let's get back to your story. So when you were in your teenage years, adolescence arrived. How did the unaddressed trauma show up in your behaviour, choices, and relationships? So you're out from home, you're angry,
I was
lost.
very angry. Yeah,
Yeah.
very lost, very angry, and just struggling to find my place in the world. There was nowhere that really ever, as a child, and once I left home as well, nowhere ever felt safe. I didn't feel like I fit in everywhere. I had this strange world that I grew up in, which was completely different from pretty much everyone else. You know, being born, first of all, I don't even think I've covered this properly yet, but I was born because my mum got raped. That's how I was conceived, and that's how I came into the world. So even today, I still haven't ever met another child born of rape. But just even growing up with that identity over me, this dark identity, I've never met a kid in my childhood that was born because their father committed this violent act. Kids that I grew up with were either products because their parents loved them or because they were, at worst, a happy accident. Mine was neither of those things. So everything was strange and weird. So growing up, having had all the volatility that I had and not being able to trust anyone, not being able to trust the system, not being able to trust my primary caregivers, as I left home, one of the things that would happen with recurring regularity was my attempts to push people away because I never thought they would actually ever stay. So my behaviour was always extreme, disrespectful. I was just extremely volatile. And it was all in an attempt to push people as far as I possibly could just to see if they really did love me in the way that they said that they did. So I would pull people like a rubber band and a rubber band until they were like, this is the limit. And I would keep pulling and keep pulling and keep pulling and keep pulling until it eventually snapped. And of course, they'd have to leave because for their own mental health, their own well-being, they couldn't be around someone as self-destructive. Even though people, I can look back and go, people did genuinely care about me, I made it impossible for them to stay. And it was obviously, for me, it was an ability to be able to have almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy to say, see, that was the evidence that I needed to say that I'm unlovable. So that was the biggest one. And then I was ridiculously untrusting of everyone. And I was just trying to feel loved. And because I'd come from a lot of sexual abuse, not from a mum, but sexual abuse as a kid, this is how it manifested in my early teens as well. For me, I confused love with sexual conquests. So it was one of those things where I thought the more people that wanted to have sex with me because of my childhood, the more validity I had, the more loved I was. So I sought for that. And it was obviously destructive. It obviously didn't do what I thought it was supposed to do, and probably did, in fact, the complete opposite. It was just pushing people away was probably the biggest one, to the point where it made me angrier, it made me more rejected, it made me more hurt because the evidence was that no one would ever stick by me.
As I said at the opening, we are two people who've come from a different place but have lived the same journey. We have. I would push anyone who professed to love me, I would push them so hard, so hard. And I'm fortunate to still be married at, 30, nearly 35 years. And my husband is the most understanding, loving man. And when we were first together, I pushed him so hard to make him prove because I didn't feel worth it. How could someone love me? Right? How really? I didn't believe it. And I also saw that sex was that was love, right? So due to childhood experience as well. And yeah, and it is like, people judge you. People, go, well, there's Leigh-Anne, she's with another boy. But it's like, well, but I just want to be loved. I just want someone to even like me.
Yeah, and this is our society is not very good at being able to look below the surface. We only ever really seem to look at external, outward, like we're talking about symptoms, the symptoms, but no one's ever looking at why there's these issues or how these symptoms manifest and where they come from. And this is what fascinates me, and I think where one of my gifts is really, I understand I have a gift now because of this life, and you would have this too, is I can see these patterns. I can see the way that these behaviours manifest. It's cause and effect. If you're sexually abused, you're probably going to be like a hypersexual or super frigid person. Like there's responses to the way that certain behaviours happen.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're not raised in a world here today, and this obviously stems from a system. If the system can't even do a good enough job of being able to really figure out how to help people, there's no chance that your layperson on the street is going to have any insight into this kind of stuff. And as I was just referring to before as well, everyone's just in survival mode. The financial literacy thing, pretty much everyone in this country is ridiculously in debt, right? Like people have got like a $1 million mortgage, a car or two on tick, they've got credit card debt, they've got HEX debt, they've probably got personal debt, debt. And we live like this is normal. That's not normal either. But of course, the pressure around that means that people have no brain capacity left other than just to survive and make ends meet, to even really have any other thought for anyone else. And of course, it creates an extremely selfish, victim-minded, I think, society, which doesn't have the ability to have compassion for others. Because when you're just trying to survive, because you're up to your eyeballs in debt, then far out, man. Like it's just not going to create a healthy environment for anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, often we're about to talk about addiction, but, like in my wanting to be liked or wanting to not be rejected, I would work too hard. So my addiction was work, and because I just didn't think I was good enough. And so I would work and work and work till I was exhausted, almost to prove that I wasn't good enough because I was making mistakes. But then I would hide those mistakes by working even harder with addiction, and it comes out in very many ways. I've heard you say that alcohol as your addiction of choice gave you something nothing else could. What need was alcohol meeting for you?
Oh gosh, that was definitely one of the very many things that I did. Alcohol was just readily available. It's a socially acceptable drug, right? And this is one of the dangerous things in the West here, and especially in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, that kind of thing, is just the drinking culture is so normalised, and people don't really talk about it being a great problem. I think people are waking up to that a little bit more now. There's more and more people that just don't drink anymore, and the younger generations are apparently more conscious of not drinking, but they're probably addicted to vaping. But it was growing up in New Zealand after I was doing international sport, and I was very conscious of, I was on doping registers, so drugs and stuff like that wasn't that available in New Zealand as well. Alcohol became something that was super easy to get my hands on, and again, it just felt like it was a normal part of growing up. It was part of, everyone got wasted. Everything here is, every time you go to an event or a barbecue or something, there's drinks involved. Hey, like you go, what bar are we meeting at to hang out at? And I was in the music scene as well, so it was just, it really was just numbing a void. It was just numbing this hole and this lack of purpose. Like I was so lost, so unhappy internally. My internal compass, I thought, was pointing me north, but it had been pointing me south the whole time. I was wired completely upside down and inside out. So everything I tried to do failed. And as I said, I was a product of my environment. I pushed everyone away. I was desperately looking to fill my need for love and connection through sex, drugs, drinking, smoking, gambling, whatever it was, like looking for these material things to fill this emptiness inside. And it was purely just that alcohol was just super readily available and almost too socially acceptable. But it had the worst effect on me. Like I did everything, right? Like I've tried every kind of like drug you can get your hands on, and just to feel something, yeah, just to feel something, and like it was just like kind of rebellious as well. But alcohol for me was the one thing that was extremely bad, because probably 50% of the time that I would drink, I would black out. So although I was wide awake, it was no longer me inside. Like something else came out, and people used to regularly joke, like, oh, Jason's hulking out again. Like I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and I would kill. Like I was in that state, I would snap, and people would look into my eyes and they would run, because I don't know what they saw, but it was no longer, there was no longer this.
Right.
But I carried on drinking because I thought it was normal, and I'd spent my whole life being told I was different. I didn't want another reason to be even more different again. So when I did eventually stop drinking, one of the common things is like people go, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you drinking?" And that's kind of the
Exactly.
So our society is hardwired with these default thinkings that are actually wrong. It's the culture, like our culture, like helps to permeate these unhealthy ideas, and people are so wired to accept the unacceptable as normal. And it's so hard for people to overcome this stuff. Like you have to be so self-willing, self-determined, and be such a self-advocate to actually fight for what you know to be the best thing for you, because the pressure of society and culture is overwhelming.
Absolutely is. And I would drink. I didn't do drugs, but I was like a chameleon. I would alter my behavior to suit every group, right? So, and that would extend to the clothing I would wear and like all of it. It just was amazing how much I could change myself. So much so that I completely lost who I was. So a bit like, that hulking out. I no longer could really understand who I was and what was me, what was an act, what was me, what was a reaction. I would overreact to people joking. People would say an inappropriate joke about childhood abuse, right? So, because it is something that people do joke about, and I would go off tap and disappear, and then I was just this other weirdo again. Leigh-Anne's weirding out. Now, you just mentioned something about international sport there. So you do have like an athletic sporting ability, and you were accepted into that area even though you were volatile. I'm really curious about how that played out.
Yeah, okay. Well, kind of. I was kind of accepted in that world. So I was an inline speed skater. So I was good. I ended up becoming a national champion, national record holder. I won international medals. I went to the Junior World Championships and got top tens at Junior Worlds. So many of the people that I raced with have gone on to go to the Winter Olympics and win Olympic titles, Olympic medals. This was the path that I was on when the Winter Olympics is on in February. I'll know a bunch of the people racing there from that part of my life. But so once I moved from Nelson, so where I was living, where I grew up at the top of the South Island at 15, I moved to Palmerston North, which is in the middle of the North Island, which was where most of the New Zealand team was based. But it didn't take long for me to become ostracised from that community because of my behaviour, because of my reactivity. So when I moved, I was living with one guy that I skated with and his mum, and that relationship quickly dissolved, and I ended up moving with another family, and then that relationship quickly dissolved. I moved in with a girlfriend, that relationship broke down, so on and so forth. So it was, I definitely, I was accepted to a degree, but not accepted as well. And yeah, it was hard because that was my identity at the time. See, growing up in the world that I did, I was smart, I was intelligent, but I could never apply myself at school. I was bullied at school. The school structure and the school system didn't enable me to do really well. So I left school at 16, and I only did enough just to basically kind of pass, and that was just on pure brains, not because I ever studied. But I also played high-level soccer, so I played in the National Youth League in New Zealand, and my aim was to go on to do professional sport because I could see it was a way that I could get out of where I'd come from. It was a way to be able to go as far away from my small town and my environment that I'd come, so I kept moving further and further away physically. And that's what sport was for me, and sport definitively saved my life. Like, it was being an international athlete from 13 years old. As I mentioned before, I was on doping registers. So it stopped me from going into drugs and drinking as early as I could have by not having that foundation of having to be careful in what I was ingesting. But as soon as I finished, like after I went to the Junior World Championships this was in Dubai. So I stopped when I was about 17 years old, and from there I went into the world of music, and it was the complete other world. Like, this was where drugs and drinking and smoking and like as much lasciviousness as possible is accepted, and that was the world that I went into. So it was like I lived these black and white bipolar type of lifestyles, and that's eventually one of the things that I was diagnosed with. The mental health stuff was bipolar too. So yeah, I did have a big sporting background, but it eventually, like everything else, blew up.
Yeah, because, well, especially in that sporting space, you're competing for your spot and they have no time. It isn't their job to be your counselor. I mean, it is their job to be your mentor, but the level of damage needed more than mentoring. So let's talk about your suddenly different moment. So the moment when you realized that your survival strategy wasn't working for you.
So mine was there was a big lead up to my suddenly different moment, and it got to the point where I was 29 and I was starting to lose my mind. So for 2 months straight, I wasn't working at the time. I'd wake up at around 7 o'clock in the morning and I would drink a litre of red wine until I could pass out. And I'd wake up again around midday and I'd drink a second litre of red wine until I could pass out. Then I'd wake up again around 6 or 7 p.m. and I'd drink a third litre of red wine for the day until I could pass out to the next morning. And I'd either drive drunk to Macca's or KFC for my one meal of the day, or I'd just pass out until the next morning. And all I would do through this period of time is just smoke cigarettes and drink. And it got to the point where I was vomiting multiple times a day, just I think from the amount of acid buildup that was in my stomach. And I just started to lose touch with reality, because remember, most of the time I'm blacking out here, or at least 50% of the time I'm blacking out here. So I would get into, like, I was becoming quite dangerous, and the people I was living with were becoming afraid of me just because of what I would become. And one afternoon I got a call from my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and she said to me, if you don't check yourself into a psych ward today, I can never speak to you again. Because it had got to the point where she had been pushed so this was her rubber band about to snap. And she'd gone through a lot. And it was like something in me was screaming that this was the turn, this was the moment. This was like the moment where it was either I would accept the hand that was being given to me, or this would have been the thing that would have ended my life. You know, I would have gone so far down that path, I would have ended up in prison or dead. So she booked me an Uber, and I got in this Uber and I checked myself into a psych ward for 3 days. And then from there, I checked myself into a stabilisation unit for 3 weeks. And then from there, I checked myself into the dodgiest rehab in Sydney, where I was housed with 35 guys that had all been paroled to this rehab as part of their release from prison. So this was my rock bottom moment. And as I sat in this rehab, like I'm a consistent 75 kilos all year round, right? And I didn't realize the state that I was in just from drinking and this one meal of KFC or Macca's a day. When I went into rehab, I was 89 kilos, just a big bloated mess, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was just trying to kill myself with drinking. Couldn't stand being awake, so I was just combing it out all the time. And I got to this rehab, and when I got there, I had this moment where I had my 30th birthday in rehab. It just I had this moment of it. It felt really, really quite a vital moment where I realized I was leaving my 20s behind and the craziness and the messiness of my 20s behind. And I had the choice to start a new decade doing something different, because as I thought about where I'd be in a year from there, I knew that if I carried on down the path, it was prison or dead. And the only other option was to change. And when I was there in this moment, I realized that I had waited my entire life for someone else or some system, some authority to come and save me. And I'd given away my power, and I talk about the pen or the authorship of my own life. And in that moment, it was, and if I never meant to be in that place. I don't think I was a bad person. As I said, I was a product of my environment. I saw myself as a victim of circumstance. And from there, I realized I had the choice to make a decision to change. And that for me was the thing that was the catalyst to doing all of that from there.
Isn't it wonderful when you have that moment, when you, and I think I was in my 30s when I looked in the mirror one day and saw that I had a forehead like Gordon Ramsay, right? And it's like, well, when did I just last look at myself? I know that when you hit that space of, holy cow, they can't help me. They aren't doing it for me. All they'll do is punish me if I keep going the way I'm going. So, as you said, prison or death. And you would be alone, and like all the things you want in life would be taken away from you. So, and there are some people who never get to that spot. They either never think they have a choice, or they're not surrounded by people who say they have a choice. Your girlfriend, your wife must be the strongest, loving, beautiful woman to stand by you during those dark times, and now to benefit from the amazing man that you are. So once you entered that recovery with those people leaving prison, what did rebuilding truly look like? Not necessarily the big wins, but the small, consistent, unglamorous choices that helped you find Jason.
Yeah, well, it was one of those things where, first of all, I had to make the decision. Like, I made the choice to change. There was no going back. I knew that once I was in that rehab, I was like, I never want to come back to a place like this ever again. And I knew that I had to make the ultimate decision to be a different person. And then, when I thought about having to not drink again for the rest of my life, that seemed really overwhelming. So I realized that I just had to do things day by day by day, and that I needed to make, if I thought about having to not drink for forever, it seemed like it was just an impossible task. So I realized I just needed to not drink today, and then tomorrow I just needed to not drink tomorrow, and then the next day I would not drink that day, until it eventually became less, there was less control over me that the alcohol seems to have. And that was a process that I learnt through, after a period of time, the drive, the white knuckling or whatever, it vanished, because you break the pattern, you break the habit. And it was a repeatable thing that I learnt through going through that process. And I applied it to smoking, I applied it to lying, I applied it to littering, I applied it to speeding, I applied it to watching porn, I applied it to like everything. Was that I just had to think very logically about not getting overwhelmed by the long ahead time frame of being able to stop doing these certain things. And that was something that was really empowering, was that it was up to me. And all I had to do was to be very present and deal with the day right in front of me. So that was one of the major things. And there was also, there's certain things that happen at certain points of time where they're just certain quotes, certain people come into your life at just the right point in time. And in rehab, there was this really basic quote that's repeated throughout Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, which is that if nothing changes, nothing changes. And I probably would have never have listened to that, but I was sitting in this place where I realized that if I wanted to have a different life, I would have to do things differently. And obviously that necessitated making some some changes, and whether or not they were hard. And one of the other things that I did, which I think is probably a vital thing for anyone coming out of this kind of life that I'm describing, was I was very conscious of going to every person that I had hurt and apologized. So I admitted my fault, even if people had mutually hurt me. I went to all of these people and I specifically acknowledged what I'd done, asked for forgiveness, but whether or not they forgave me or not didn't matter. I was taking responsibility and accountability for my own behavior. There was an instance where I got overpaid at a job, and I got in contact with the accountant and I said, I need to pay this money back. And he goes, don't worry about it. And I was like, no, I have to. I have to make this right and give the money back. So I transferred the money back. And what it was doing was it was taking me, by apologizing to these people and admitting my fault, it was distancing myself with the old life that I had, because it meant that I couldn't go back to that life. Because if I did, I would be going back on my word, and my word, trust, was something that was just hugely important to me. So now I'm very, very conscious of being as good as I possibly can be with, if I say I'm going to do something, I have to do it. So those would be the couple of things that I would encourage if anyone's going through a really challenging or difficult time, especially with the stuff that controls us, because it can be as innocuous as coffee. I used to drink 6 or 7 coffees a day, and it was about being able to just deal with the day that was in front of me at the time. That like you said, it wasn't pretty, but it was the discipline that I think I'd learned from international sport, from having done that. That was stuff that I could apply to controlling and taking back control of my own life.
Yes. And that rehab told you could, right? And sometimes we don't have that external guidance that we can change, especially if our behaviour is socially acceptable.
Well, why would you need to change?
Yeah. So working too hard, being a workaholic, well, who's going to tell you to stop working so hard? Especially if you're on a salary and you don't get paid for it. Nobody's going to really stop and go, well, hey, Leigh-Anne, do you realise that you are really hurting yourself by doing this stuff?
And this is why I think that people's self-awareness, I think, is this is no one's fault, but it's a real weakness of our societies, is for people to actually have the self-awareness and the ability to be able to self-advocate, because we live in a society today here where I believe a lot of these authority figures, whether doctors, whether psychologists, whether institutions like child protection, they say, trust us, we've got you. We've got your best intentions at heart. We know what we're doing. Take this drug, take this pill, take this whatever, and people just believe it because they're authority figures and almost don't say anything. And the amount of harm this can potentially cause to people, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't do this stuff, but people need to be better educated around what they're actually looking for as the end result. Because we can take, for me, one of the big ones that I speak a lot about is pharmaceutical prescriptions for mental health. And I don't know anyone that gets put on a prescription for mental health that then has a plan to actually take them off. Again, it's just treating symptoms, not the root cause. And pharmaceutical prescription drugs for mental health, absolutely, I needed them for a certain period of time, but it should only ever be to help stabilize people, to then eventually get them off, to be able to help get them to the point where they can manage their own life without pharmaceutical drugs being a crutch. But that's not what happens as a general rule within our society. People just take the drug forever, and that's not a solution to me.
And often those drugs then stop working as they become like, as the issues continue to bubble up. So until you deal with the issues, and I know sometimes you do need the medication to help balance the chemical mix inside your body and inside your brain, but it's not forever. It's not the answer. So when you meet people in your travels who instantly remind you of your younger self, what are the things that you can see in them instantly?
I see that people are just directionless and are victims of circumstance. They often have had their power taken away, their voice taken away, and they don't realise that they have the power to change their own lives. Again, they're me, where they're paralysed waiting for someone that's promised. Again, some person, some government institution, child protection. We're going to save you. We're going to save you. Trust us. We've got you. We care for you. We love you. And people get put in these golden handcuffs of always waiting, always waiting. And as time goes on and more damage happens and people get more and more hurt inside, they become deeper victims. They lash out. They rely on drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff, these coping mechanisms. And people have just become so disempowered to actually understand that we are the ones solely that control our own destinies. We don't see ourselves as having the ability to write our story. I lived growing up being told that I was nothing, that I would be no one, that no one would love me, all these types of things. I'd be a failure. And so, of course, I believed it, and it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But all along, I had the power to live a different life if I wanted to. Surprise, surprise. And when I realised that, it was empowering. But there's all of these people that have been counted out and are listening to what other broken, hurt people say about them. And they're not even the authority to even speak on who these people are. It's not like you're the ultimate grand poobah who's mastered life and going, you're a nobody. It's a whole bunch of people that have done nothing themselves that are generally saying, you're going to do nothing. And it's just, again, it's the whole hurting people thing. But I do see, and this is not just children, this is just people all over the world that have been hurt and downtrodden by life to the point where they don't see a way out, and they have become powerless.
And I think that it's so important to change the way people choose to take that power back. Now, for the listeners, I know this is going a little bit longer than my normal podcast. However, this is a fantastic conversation. It is so needed in society right now that I challenge you to keep listening, because we've got more to say. So, Jason, I can't cut this short, and I don't think it's too important, because we're about to start talking about the things that can be done differently, your vision for how things can change. So, firstly, if you could change one thing inside schools tomorrow to better support kids living with trauma or instability, apart from giving them the label of ADHD and labelling them, what do you think could make the biggest difference for them?
There's probably a couple of things. I think, when you're thinking short term and long term, if I'm thinking short term, with something that they could do is to bring people like me. You need to be bringing in people that have a voice, that have had this lived experience, that have real credibility with young people, to actually come in and try and inspire them to be able to make choices that impact themselves. My keynote and workshops have been designed in a way that is about creating a moment of specifically designed, crafted disruption to be able to give people in the moment a choice to change their own lives. Right? It's not a keynote for the sake of having a conversation or like fluffy information, or even that it's raw. It's specifically designed to do that for individuals, but on a mass scale. So it's designed to also impact the most amount of people, to shift a room as one. And then it's also designed in a way that can reinforce the sticky language. I give very specific key takeaway language, in big part around reclaiming the pen of our lives to write a different ending to the story, which is designed in a way that teachers, youth workers, wellbeing officers, CEOs, HR teams, whatever, can take this language and reinforce the key learnings again throughout the year. So it's not just a single moment, but it then becomes an enforced and reinforced ability to be able to then help create the change, because it needs to be sustained, right? So I call it sustained influence. But it's specific people like myself that can come in. Society needs to be providing our children with good role models. You can make your own decision about whether or not you think I'm a good role model, but the role models that our young people have been provided, young women and young men, by the mainstream world, are pretty shockingly bad, right? They're leading them up the garden path.
Well, the influencers who are out there saying, well, your body's got to look like this and your tan's got to look like that and your lips and your bum and whatever.
Yeah,
Dangerous. Just
exactly.
goddamn dangerous.
Exactly. It's really, 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 really bad. And again, it's feeding into this materialism. So platforms need to be given to people that have a voice, that have the ability to be able to impact people in a positive way, and especially with our young men, because there's a whole conversation around masculinity and genuinely what that looks like. And that's another conversation. But in a short term, it's bringing people like me in to be able to speak to and inspire, and giving a stage and a platform to people that have the ability to impact our young people in a positive way that is going to last. But then, as well, schools should be doing and incorporating proper education around parenting and around being able to give people more understanding of how to deal with what they've gone through, where we normalize conversations. We normalize actually listening to and giving voices to young people. Because I went and raised the issues that I had multiple times through in clinical environments that should have listened, didn't. They didn't take it seriously. And this is still happening all day here, where these authorities think that they know what's best, but clearly they're doing a shocking job of what they've been given stewardship for. But young people need to be given a bit more education around what it is to be a parent, to be a self-sacrificial person, to be able to put yourself aside to raise a child. Not just have a child because you think it's going to solve a relationship problem, or you can live vicariously through them, or they're going to be successful because you weren't, or whatever. But people need better education around what it is to be a parent.
Yes.
So those are my short-term and long-term, very quick solutions that I can offer you now.
And the power of one adult who really sees you, right? So finding that mentor, that person who refuses to be blocked by your push away style or whatever. Did you have one adult who was able to really do that for you, and where can teenagers and parents, because that can't be a parent, it often even can't be family, but where can people look for those one adults?
So I had two throughout my life, and the kid, it was my grandma, right? And it was just her showing love, like just not giving up, because she knew if she did, I would have been destroyed by the system. So she looked after me for as long as she possibly could have. And it was, whether she thought it was her Christian duty, I mean, I'm sure there was a part of that in there, but it was just genuine concern and love as well for me. And she just didn't give up. She completely laid her life down and sacrificed. Like, she could have had an easier life if she did not do anywhere near half the stuff that she'd done for me. But she chose to do that. She'd already had 8 kids of her own. She didn't have to take me in. But she chose to, and she did pretty much not have a retirement, and I made her life hell. And unfortunately, she never got to see the man that I'm becoming. I went to rehab in 2018 and she died in 2019. So she only got to see that transition. And then as an adult, it was my wife, my girlfriend, again, like you said before, just like your husband, so patient, gentle in the way that she helped me. I think that it's probably going to be hard for a parent to be that person, purely because, and this was one of the things I was going to say before, about most parents, I don't think, have the ability to be able to separate themselves to actually do what a child genuinely needs. And I think a lot of the time we can actually do people a disservice by not letting people hit rock bottom. Like, we're so desperate to save people from reaching the point where they would actually get so low that they turn around, because we're afraid of what might happen as well. But in just saving people, a lot of the time we can enable them, or we can actually stop them from learning the lesson that they need to learn for themselves. Because as you know, like, you can force people to go to rehab, you can do all that kind of stuff, you can force people into counselling, but until it's self-willed and self-driven, it's not going to make any difference. So rock bottom, I think, is I was one of those people that had to get there, and this is where I don't think parents will do a great job. It's possible, but it's unlikely. But yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there for people that are going to be doing this. I think that most people will have someone in their life, and it might be different people at different points of time that can just hold the gap. For people, that happened all throughout my life. There was always someone there that was able to help in some capacity, and I learned things from and was able just to keep me kind of going along the way. But people as individuals, there needs to be a level of like perseverance and self-will, or just a belief and hope that things can get better. Like, life can change so drastically, so quickly, and that's what makes me really sad about suicide, is for people to get, and I've been there, people to get to the point where they see life as being hopeless and that it can't change. I've lived so many different lives in my 37 short years. I've seen how fast life can change if we so desire it. But of course, we can stay in the same state too. But there's plenty of good people out there. There's plenty of good people. And one of the other things I'd just comment on very quickly with that is, I spent most of my life believing that the whole world had to love me for me to feel love. But truly, we only need one person to genuinely believe in us and love us, to stop us from becoming like a psychopath or a sociopath or those sorts of things. Just technically only one person needs to be able to show us the love and the stability. But we can think that, especially if we've come from hurt, that it has to be massive and everyone has to love us. And that's I think part of the trap, is most people, I think, will have someone. You hear these stories all the time about the grandparent, or someone that came in and gave people love when they didn't have to. And if people have that, I would really encourage them to lean into and to cherish and appreciate that and learn from that, because then you can become that for someone else.
Yeah. If you could redesign the youth mental health and behavioural system from the ground up, what would you like, and why do you believe that change is possible?
If it comes to child protective services, I'll start there and then I'll go to sort of the mental health one. But if it comes to like child protective services, there needs to be some genuine accountability, I think, for the people of this nation to hold these organisations and these institutions to account. They're taking taxpayer money most of the time and not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. It's inexcusable that tens of thousands of children are being forgotten and left behind in a first world country like Australia. This isn't a third world country. There's absolutely no excuse why this is happening. There's been many, especially here in New South Wales, many reports and audits written about the changes that need to be happening, and they're not happening. So there does need to be some more accountability of children. If organisations outside of that are required to provide and adhere to certain mandatory reporting timeframes, those standards need to be for these governmental organisations as well. There needs to be some real accountability for it, and care. There just needs to be genuine care. I don't even know how we've got to the point where we can not even blink, really, that the government itself is not blinking at 85,000 children not having their cases investigated in a year without some serious... Like, why do I have to be the one that asks for an overhaul of this? Why aren't they going, hang on, this isn't working, maybe we should take accountability for our own selves? It's just so stupid. Like, obviously it's not working, because if they're not going to hold themselves accountable, like, it just speaks to the rot inside the institution. And then when it comes to the mental health field, the thing that's missing from the psychological field is actual psychological insight. Like, it's baffling to me that all they do is, and I'm not talking about everybody, I'm just generalizing here, but the generalization is that most of it is just dealing with surface level symptoms. You would think that the psychological field would have the psychological insight to actually deal with the root cause rather than just deal with the symptoms. Like, it baffles me that these institutions don't have their own insight or self-awareness to be able to see that they're not operating in a way that's actually there to help humanity. So, yeah, if I was to overhaul that, I would include a whole bunch more heart into it, because I think really genuine care and heart, I think they've become so desensitized to the amount of workload. People are so overloaded, they're under-resourced. It's purely, in both child protective and the mental health field, it's crisis response. They're not preparing ahead of time and anticipating how they can help people in the future. It's always dealing with crisis. So you can never get ahead. But regardless, both are functioning in a way that is incongruent with what they are designed to do. It doesn't take a genius to see that. So there needs to be some kind of overhaul of both of these things. But until that happens, because I am skeptical about the efficacy of that happening, people need to be self-advocating. People need to be better educated to understand what their desired outcome is when, if you're going into the mental health field and you're getting as a patient, you need to know your outcome. Do you want to be on medication for the rest of your life? Because if you don't, you're going to need to advocate for that along the way and ask questions around what these medications do, what the side effects are, rather than just taking drugs and not asking questions.
Yes, because if they don't make these changes, if we don't have this self-advocation, society as a whole will continue to be as out of control as it is right now. That we've got youth violence and people scared in the house, all sorts of things are happening. But again, they all go back to the same root cause, is that we don't know what safe is. We don't know respect. We don't know that acting out due to fear and rejection isn't the way.
Well, you're totally right. And as you're talking there, I'm thinking sort of big picture. If kids aren't safe in their own home, and tens of thousands of kids in New South Wales alone are not being protected by the institutions that are supposed to protect them, what kind of future can we hope to see? Again, I said it before, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It's just wild that we can't see that this is not going to have a stratospheric impact over the next 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years, generation after generation. This is a serious issue that our civilization, this is not just in Australia, that our society really needs to be getting behind if we want to leave. If we're stewards, we're the stewards, the adults, the ones that are basically the ones that are going to hand over stewardship to the next generations. We're not doing a good enough job.
That's right. We're not. Thank you. So, Jason, thank you. Thank you for bringing not just your story, but your insight, your lived authority and your heart for young people in this space. What we've shared today is not just trauma, but truth. Not just survival, but choice. Not just individual healing, but the blueprint for systematic transformation. For anyone listening who grew up in chaos, who learned to become small or explosive or invisible in order to survive, please hear this. You were never the problem. You were the child in the environment, and your behaviour was your nervous system doing its best to protect you. And for young people listening who feel like they're spiralling, numbing, drowning or disappearing, you're not broken. You are overwhelmed, and overwhelmed people need support, not shame. Change doesn't begin with a new rule or a new diagnosis. Change begins with one human seeing another clearly. Jason's story proves what's possible when someone chooses differently. My story proves what's possible when the body finally says enough. And your story, whether you are a parent, teacher, leader, or young person, is still unwritten. The systems we inherited were never designed with trauma literacy, but the system we can build next can be. To anyone who felt something shift while listening today, please take care of your nervous system. Reach for support and remember, we are all only one choice, one moment away from being suddenly different. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jason. You are amazing.
Thanks, Leigh-Anne.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me.
If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.